Thug-on bike punches 60-year-old woman, has no idea who was watching. It was just another evening stroll in Brooklyn. Until it wasn't. Out of nowhere, a man on a bike struck an elderly woman, confident he'd get away with it. What he didn't expect was the silent eyes watching from the shadows. Brooklyn had always been her home. To most passersby, she was just another elderly woman walking along the sidewalks, blending seamlessly into the city's fabric. But to those who knew her, Margaret Lane was a force of quiet resilience. A retired schoolteacher, she had spent decades shaping young minds, instilling values of kindness and perseverance. Now, at 60, she found solace in the simpler pleasures of life. Early morning tea by her apartment window, the soothing rhythm of a good book, and most importantly, her nightly walks down Hancock Street, a ritual she had kept for years. She lived alone in a modest brownstone, her children grown and scattered across the country. A son working in finance in Chicago, a daughter raising her own family in San Francisco. They called often, worried about her being alone in the bustling city, but Margaret always reassured them. Brooklyn was her sanctuary, a place where every street corner held a memory, every face a familiar echo of the past. Her evening strolls were more than just routine. They were moments of reflection. She enjoyed watching the world move at its relentless pace, smiling at couples holding hands, nodding at the street vendors selling roasted peanuts and warm pretzels. For her, these walks were a reminder that life, despite its changes, still carried a rhythm of familiarity. Little did she know, on this particular night, that rhythm was about to be shattered. The city had a way of whispering stories to those who listened. The flickering neon lights of distant diners, the distant hum of traffic blending with the rhythmic clatter of footsteps on cracked pavement. The cool breeze carried the faint aroma of fresh bagels and gasoline, an odd but familiar mix. The streetlights overhead bathed Hancock Street in a soft amber glow, their flickering creating ghostly shadows that danced across the brick walls. Margaret walked with an easy pace, her footsteps light, as if she belonged to the night itself. Around her, life bustled as usual. Couples chatting on their stoops, the occasional honk of a taxi impatiently waiting for a slow pedestrian to cross, and the ever-present hum of distant subway trains rumbling beneath the surface. Despite the usual city chaos, there was a sense of safety. After all, Brooklyn wasn't the Brooklyn of old. It had changed, softened around the edges. Crime was something distant, something you read about but never truly expected to experience firsthand. But tonight, lurking just beyond the pools of lamplight, something malevolent was watching. In the shadows, Daniel Biggs watched. He wasn't a man people paid attention to, just another worn-out face drifting through the cracks of Brooklyn's bustling streets. But behind his dull eyes and shaggy beard hid something far more dangerous. A predator. At 53, he had long learned to blend in, a master of invisibility in a city teeming with distractions. His criminal record read like a rap sheet out of a noir novel: assault, petty theft, vandalism. Yet he was never quite bad enough to stay locked away for long. The system spit him back out time and time again, and each time, he emerged angrier, meaner, and more reckless. He roamed the streets aimlessly, seeking easy prey, someone distracted, someone vulnerable. Tonight, Margaret Lane was that someone. Biggs had been watching her for weeks now. He noticed her patterns, her slow pace, her predictable route, the way she never carried much other than a small purse. To him, she was an easy mark, another faceless victim who wouldn't see him coming. He grinned to himself, the hunger for control bubbling under his skin. As he straddled his worn-out bicycle, fingers curling tightly around the handlebars, he felt the familiar thrill of the hunt rising in his chest. He had done this before. Hit, grab, escape. Quick. Painless. For him, at least. What he didn't know, what he could never have imagined, was that tonight he had chosen the wrong victim at the wrong time. It happened in an instant. Margaret didn't even have time to register the figure speeding toward her. One moment, she was lost in thought, taking in the soft glow of the streetlights, and the next pain, blinding, searing pain that exploded across her face as Daniel Biggs' fist connected. The world around her spun violently as she collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving pavement. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as she hit the ground, the rough concrete scraping against her skin. Her handbag tumbled from her grasp, its contents spilling across the sidewalk. Loose change, a worn-out paperback, a set of keys that clattered loudly in the empty night. Biggs didn't stop. With the same detached ruthlessness that had governed his life for years, he pedaled away, his silhouette blending into the darkened street. He didn't look back, didn't hesitate. In his mind, this was just another hit, another face that would soon be forgotten. He was confident, too confident, that the city's indifference would once again work in his favor. But tonight, fate had different plans. She lay there, motionless, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, drowning out the distant sounds of the city. Why? The question echoed in her mind as she gingerly touched her throbbing cheek, feeling the warmth of blood trickling from a small cut above her brow. In the chaos of her thoughts, old memories surfaced. Her daughter's laughter, Sunday dinners with her grandchildren, the gentle voice of her late husband reminding her to always stay aware of her surroundings. And yet, here she was vulnerable, exposed, utterly alone. A trembling sigh escaped her lips. She tried to sit up, her frail limbs protesting with every movement. Her vision blurred momentarily, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had always prided herself on her independence, her strength. But in this moment, lying on the ground with the cold night air wrapping around her, she felt small, weak. For the first time in a long time, Margaret was truly afraid. Then, just as despair threatened to take over, a voice, a sharp, commanding voice, cut through the night. Across the street, standing outside the red-bricked fire station, four men had been enjoying the rare quiet of the evening. The rhythmic hum of the city was something they had grown accustomed to. Sirens in the distance, the occasional crackling radio call, the distant chatter of passers-by. But tonight, something was different. Captain Jake Callahan had just taken a sip of his coffee when he saw it. A blur of movement, the unmistakable thud of a body hitting the ground. His instincts kicked in before his brain had fully processed the scene. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice sharp. Firefighter Luis Torres, standing next to him, had already dropped his cigarette, eyes locked on the retreating figure of the man on the bike. "Yeah, I saw it. He hit her." There was no hesitation. Jake tossed his coffee aside, already sprinting across the street. The other three followed without question. They didn't need a plan. Years of training had conditioned them to act, not think. As they closed the distance, their minds raced. Luis, a father of two young daughters, felt a surge of anger coursing through him. That could have been his mother, his wife, his child. No way was he letting this guy get away. Firefighter Marcus Reynolds, the youngest of the group, felt his heart pounding in his chest. Adrenaline surged through his veins, but there was something else, rage. He had seen too many of these random acts of violence, too many moments where innocent people were hurt for no reason. Tonight, he was putting a stop to it. The pavement rushed under their feet as they chased after Biggs, who, realizing he was being followed, began pedaling harder. "Hey, stop right there!" Jake's voice rang out, but Biggs didn't listen. He swerved into an alleyway, weaving through the narrow path, hoping to lose his pursuers. But firefighters were used to pressure, used to chasing down time, fire, and chaos itself. They weren't about to let some low-life thug outrun them. Luis pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, but he was gaining. He could hear Biggs cursing under his breath, hear the sound of the bike chain rattling frantically. "Cut him off!" Jake shouted, motioning to Marcus to take the side street, anticipating Biggs' next move. They had worked together for years. They knew how to think fast, how to outmaneuver a threat. Biggs, sensing the trap closing around him, made a desperate attempt to flee, zigzagging wildly between garbage bins and parked cars. But it was no use. Within seconds, Luis lunged forward, grabbing the back of the bike and yanking hard. Biggs toppled, crashing to the ground with a loud grunt. He fought back, fists swinging wildly, catching Marcus across the jaw. But the firefighters were stronger, fueled by a righteous fury that Biggs couldn't match. They pinned him down, holding him firmly against the pavement, refusing to let go until the flashing blue and red lights of the NYPD filled the street. Breathless, Jake wiped the sweat from his brow, staring down at the writhing man beneath him. "You mess with the wrong people tonight, buddy," he muttered, his voice steady, filled with an unshakable conviction. Biggs pedaled furiously, his breath ragged and uneven, weaving through the narrow streets of Brooklyn like a snake slithering through tall grass. The dim streetlights flickered above him, casting long, distorted shadows as he ducked into an alleyway, hoping to lose his relentless pursuers. His pulse pounded in his ears, sweat dripping down his brow. He had to escape. Behind him, the firefighters were closing in. Their heavy boots pounded against the pavement, the sound reverberating through the quiet night. Captain Jake Callahan led the charge, his mind racing as he dodged past a group of pedestrians who scattered in shock. The city had seen its fair share of crime, but tonight the city would fight back. Biggs swerved sharply, nearly colliding with a fruit vendor pushing his cart down the sidewalk. Apples spilled across the pavement, causing firefighter Luis Torres to slip, his arms flailing wildly before he regained his footing. "Keep going," Jake barked, his eyes locked on Biggs, who was now disappearing into the labyrinth of Brooklyn's side streets. The alleyways were narrow and unforgiving, trash cans cluttering the path, broken glass crunching beneath the wheels of Biggs' bike. He darted left, then right, nearly colliding with a delivery truck idling at the curb. The truck's driver honked furiously, but Biggs didn't care. He was a predator on the run, desperate to disappear into the night. But the firefighters weren't giving up. Marcus Reynolds, the youngest of the group, took a shortcut through an adjacent alley, hoping to cut Biggs off. He burst onto the main street just in time to see Biggs zigzagging through traffic, his movements frantic. Cars screeched to a halt, horns blaring, but Biggs pressed on, his grip tight on the handlebars. Jake and Luis pushed forward, weaving through the throngs of late-night commuters, their uniforms drawing curious glances. "Stop that guy!" Jake shouted, hoping someone would react. But most people just stepped aside, too caught up in their own lives to intervene. As they reached a crowded intersection, Biggs spotted his opportunity. A group of teenagers was crossing the street, their faces illuminated by their phone screens. He aimed for the narrow gap between them, barely squeezing through. Behind him, firefighter Tony West barely managed to avoid colliding with one of the teens, his momentum carrying him dangerously close to the curb. "Move! Move!" Torres shouted, shoving past a man walking his dog. The air was thick with tension, adrenaline coursing through their veins. Suddenly, up ahead, Biggs saw an opportunity, an open subway entrance. He grinned wickedly, knowing the underground tunnels could provide him with the perfect escape. He ditched the bike, letting it clatter against the pavement as he sprinted down the stairs two at a time. "Not a chance," Jake growled, diving after him. The station was nearly empty, the eerie hum of an arriving train filling the underground corridor. Biggs shoved past a startled commuter, vaulting over the turnstile in one fluid motion. Jake, Luis, and Marcus weren't far behind. Their breath came in ragged gasps, but their focus remained locked onto their target. Biggs darted onto the platform, skidding to a halt as he realized the train doors were just beginning to close. In a last desperate attempt, he lunged forward, only to be tackled midair by Marcus, sending both men crashing to the ground. Biggs thrashed violently beneath Marcus, his fists swinging wildly. One landed squarely on Marcus' jaw, snapping his head back, but Marcus didn't let go. He held on, gritting his teeth through the pain, his training kicking in. Jake and Luis were on him in seconds. "Get him down!" Jake shouted, grabbing one of Biggs' arms and yanking it behind his back. Biggs let out an enraged snarl, twisting and flailing with the strength of a man desperate to escape. "You're not going anywhere," Luis hissed, his knee pressing firmly into Biggs' back. Biggs struggled harder, managing to wriggle free for a moment before Torres tackled him back down, his weight pinning him to the cold tile floor. The platform filled with the sound of heavy breathing, grunts, and the scuffling of shoes against the dirty ground. Finally, the fight drained out of Biggs. He lay there, his chest rising and falling rapidly, sweat pooling on his forehead. Defeated. Jake's voice was calm, but firm. "It's over, pal." Within moments, the distant wail of sirens grew louder, and the unmistakable flash of red and blue lights flooded the stairwell. NYPD officers stormed down, weapons drawn, their faces set in grim determination. "Good work," one of the officers muttered as he cuffed Biggs, hauling him to his feet. "We'll take it from here." Jake stood up slowly, wiping the sweat from his brow, his gaze never leaving Biggs as he was led away. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, just the quiet resolve of a man who knew he had done the right thing. As the officers dragged Biggs away, the firefighters turned their attention to Margaret, who was now sitting on the curb, surrounded by concerned bystanders. Someone had given her a bottle of water, and she sipped it slowly, her hands still trembling. People began to gather, murmuring in hushed tones. A young woman, phone in hand, approached Jake. "That was incredible," she said breathlessly. "I got the whole thing on video." She showed him the screen, grainy footage of their chase through the streets, the moment of Biggs' capture. Before Jake could respond, applause erupted from the crowd. Strangers clapped, some even cheering, their faces filled with admiration. An elderly man stepped forward and patted Luis on the back. "Good on you, son," he said. "We need more people like you out here." Social media lit up almost instantly. The video, uploaded within minutes, began racking up views. Comments flooded in. "Heroes don't wear capes, they wear firefighter uniforms." Meanwhile, Margaret was helped to her feet, her eyes brimming with gratitude. She reached out and took Jake's hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved me." Jake gave her a reassuring nod. "Just doing our job, ma'am." As the crowd slowly dispersed and the flashing lights dimmed, the firefighters exchanged glances. They knew they had made a difference tonight, not just for Margaret, but for the entire community. Margaret woke to the soft beeping of hospital monitors and the sterile scent of antiseptics lingering in the air. The dull ache in her face reminded her that what had happened the night before wasn't just a bad dream. It was real. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the moment in her mind. The sudden impact, the cold pavement, the rush of footsteps. But amidst the fear and pain, there was something else: gratitude. She had survived, not because she was strong, but because strangers had cared enough to act. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of familiar voices. Her son, Robert, entered first, his face lined with worry. Behind him, her daughter Emily, clutching a bouquet of daisies, her lips pressed into a thin smile. They rushed to her side, concern evident in their eyes. "Mom, are you okay?" Robert asked, his voice tight with emotion. Margaret nodded weakly, offering a faint smile. "I'm fine thanks to them." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "We saw the video, Mom. Those firefighters, they were incredible." Margaret exhaled slowly. "Yes, they were." She reached for Emily's hand, squeezing it gently. "But you know what I've realized?" Her voice grew stronger. "It's not just about the heroes in uniforms. It's about all of us. We have to look out for each other. I was lucky, but what if next time it's someone else? Someone with no one to help?" Robert sat beside her, nodding. "You're right, Mom. Maybe it's time we start thinking about how we can give back to our own communities." Margaret smiled. "Exactly. Kindness isn't just about grand gestures. It's about the little things. Keeping an eye out, speaking up, doing the right thing, even when no one's watching." As she looked at her family, she knew this ordeal had changed her, but maybe, just maybe, it would change others too. Across town, inside the familiar walls of the firehouse, life moved on. The sirens still wailed, the radios still crackled with dispatch calls, and the smell of burnt coffee still lingered in the air. To the firefighters who had tackled Biggs the night before, it was just another day on the job. Luis Torres sat on the edge of the fire truck, polishing his boots, while Marcus Reynolds worked on checking the equipment. The events of the previous night had already become part of their long list of memories, something they'd done because it was the right thing to do, not for the praise that followed. As Jake Callahan walked in, his phone buzzed with yet another news notification about their actions. He rolled his eyes, tossing the phone onto the counter. You see this? They're calling us heroes again. Luis chuckled, not looking up. I just did what any decent person would do. Marcus grinned. Decent people don't usually tackle criminals in subway stations, man. Jake shrugged. If it were my mom, I'd hope someone would do the same for her. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling over them. They weren't superheroes. They weren't vigilantes. They were just men who had taken an oath to protect, to serve, and to do what was right. And that's what they had done. Luis looked up from his boots, his eyes serious. You think she's okay? The lady? Jake nodded. Yeah, she'll be all right. But what matters is she knows someone cared. They exchanged knowing glances before getting back to work. There were always more people to help, more lives to save. The footage of Biggs' takedown spread like wildfire, racking up millions of views across social media platforms. Brooklyn had spoken. Justice had been served. The community rallied behind Margaret, sending her messages of support and commending the firefighters for their swift action. Soon enough, Daniel Biggs found himself in a very different setting, a cold, fluorescent-lit courtroom, surrounded by the weight of his actions. With an extensive criminal record stacked against him and the irrefutable video evidence, his fate was sealed. He wouldn't be escaping this time. As Margaret sat in the back of the courtroom, watching the judge sentence Biggs to several years behind bars, she felt closure. Justice had prevailed, but something more important had emerged: hope. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing it a lesson in community courage. The incident sparked conversations about urban safety, neighborhood vigilance, and the importance of looking out for one another. Margaret's story became a beacon of resilience, proof that kindness and courage could outweigh even the darkest moments. The video of the firefighters' heroic chase and takedown spread like wildfire across social media. What started as a grainy, shaky recording of a chaotic night soon turned into a viral sensation. The clip, showing the moment the 4 firefighters tackled Daniel Biggs to the ground, was shared across platforms with captions like "Real-life heroes don't wear capes" and "Brooklyn stands together." Within hours, local news stations picked up the story, and soon national outlets followed. The firefighters' faces were everywhere, on morning talk shows, featured in newspaper headlines, and trending hashtags. Comments flooded in, praising their courage and swift action. This gives me hope for humanity. We need more people like them in our communities. Firefighters, cops, neighbors. Let's all look out for each other. Margaret, now safely recovering at home, watched in quiet amazement as messages poured in from strangers. Some were simply words of encouragement, others heartfelt letters from people who had once been victims of similar attacks. Each message carried a common theme: the power of community. The most popular phrase accompanying the video became a rallying cry: we must look out for each other. The hashtag Stand Together started trending, inspiring conversations about public safety and the importance of stepping up when others are in need. Local businesses showed their support, offering free meals to first responders and organizing community safety workshops. The firefighters, humble as ever, shrugged off the attention, but their actions had ignited something bigger than they could have imagined: a movement. In an interview a few weeks later, Margaret sat comfortably in her living room, the soft hum of her granddaughter playing in the background. A local news anchor asked her how she felt now that the ordeal was over. Margaret smiled gently, her eyes filled with wisdom. I never thought something like this could happen to me, she said, her voice steady. But what I've learned is that no one is truly safe until we decide to look out for one another. She leaned forward, her hands clasped together. Helping each other isn't an option. It's a responsibility. Her words resonated deeply, sparking further discussions online and offline. Margaret's message reached beyond Brooklyn, touching communities across the country. Neighborhood watch groups saw a surge in volunteers. People began paying more attention to their surroundings, and local leaders pledged to improve street safety measures. The firefighters echoed a similar sentiment. When asked what they thought of their newfound fame, Jake Callahan simply replied, "We're just doing what anyone should do." But he added a thought-provoking remark: "If you see something wrong, do something right." It's that simple. As the days passed, the The story's buzz slowly faded from the headlines, but its message endured. Margaret's walks resumed, but now they felt different. She noticed how people glanced at each other a little longer, how neighbors exchanged more smiles, and how a collective sense of responsibility lingered in the air. And as she walked down Hancock Street once more, Margaret realized she wasn't walking alone anymore. She never really had been. The incident on Hancock Street served as a powerful reminder that no one is truly alone in their struggles. There is strength in community and courage in collective action. Margaret's story became more than just an isolated event. It evolved into a lesson about vigilance, empathy, and responsibility. It showed that standing up for one another, whether in the face of danger or in daily life, is not just an act of heroism, but a fundamental duty we all share. The firefighters who intervened didn't see themselves as heroes. They saw themselves as neighbors, proving that acts of kindness and bravery are within reach for everyone. In a world often overshadowed by fear and uncertainty, this story stands as a beacon of hope, a reminder that by looking out for one another, we create a safer, stronger, and more compassionate society.